Hey, this is Brian. Thanks for watching Kies. In today's video, I'm installing upgraded turbos on my friend Edwin's G82 M4, and I'm going to bring you along for the ride and show you how to do it step by step. It's the exact same process if you have an M4 like Edwin, you have a G80 M3 like me, or maybe you're like Bill and you have a G87 M2. Now, if you do have an X3M or an X4M being SUV, there are some slight differences, but this video is going to cover about 95% of what you need to know. The turbos we're installing, these are the Mosselman Extremes. I run them on my personal G80 M3, and I absolutely love them. These are hybrid turbos. What that means, they keep a factory core, they gut them, new compressor wheels, new turbine wheels, give you big turbo potential in a small package. That being said, maybe you have a set of Pures, maybe you have a set of LM, maybe Mosselman, maybe another brand. Regardless of the brand, if you're installing hybrid turbos, this video is for you. So with that, let's get started. First part of the process is we need to disconnect the battery. So what you're gonna do, lift up this tray and just disconnect the negative side. Okay. Push it down to the side. Next, what I like to do to prevent the trunk from closing is put this in the way, so if somebody accidentally closes this, they won't lock you out. I also like to pop these latches for the rear seat, so in case anything does get shut, you still have a way to your battery. All right, from here, pull that lever by your left foot twice, and you can pop your hood. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to remove the brace, both the lower V portion and the one that goes straight across. So for this, you're going to need a 13 mil for this bolt, and a 15 for the rest. Now, while this car does not have an engine cover on it, I do want to show you how to properly remove one of these so you don't break any of the flimsy little tabs. So this will be sitting here just like so. This one doesn't have grommets in it. What I like to do is start by lifting up over here. There's a grommet over here you need to release, and one over here. And then I like to pop this one and then pop this one. If you take a look over here, the typical grommet locations are here, 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 and here. Just go slow, do one at a time. This way you're not going to break anything. Next, what we need to do is we need to remove this intake. So we have the long part here, and we also have the shorter section over here. Now, to do this, if you have an E-Venturi, it's typically recommended that you remove the coolant reservoir, which we're going to have to do anyway. So I'm going to remove these two 10 mils up here, and then I'm going to remove my E-Venturi intake. As many of you know, on the S58, the charge pipe is down there below a lot of coolant lines and whatnot. So that being said, we are going to be disassembling most of this section here because we need to get the fan out. It's going to make everything 1,000 times easier. So with that, let's start over here with these 4 push pins over here. We're gonna pull this up, and then this entire piece is gonna come out, and then we're going to work on removing all of this. This entire brace is gonna come out, and then we can pull the fan. Now that this plastic cover's off, what we need to do is we need to remove these T30. So there's 3 on the bottom. There's one here, here, and then over here. And then you have 2 up top, 1 there, and 1 over here. Next, we're going to remove these 6 13 mils across the top. Next, we have 4 T40s we need to remove. There's 2 on this side over here, and then 2 over here. Next, you're going to need an E18 E-Torx to remove these 2 bolts over here and these 2 over here. Now at this point, there are a couple push pins down here, 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 and here that we need to get to, but you can't just get to them from the top. What we need to do is we need to start by removing all 8 of these T30s across the top of the bumper, so that way we can pull the bumper back and remove those pins. All right, with the top of the bumper cover loose, you're just gonna gently pull it back, and now you have these pins exposed, same ones that we had earlier, where you basically just pull out the center section and then pull out the rest. So here, I'll show you what this looks like. Okay. Just these guys, so all you need to do pop up that middle section, and then a lot of times you can just pry out the entire thing. Next, what we need to do is we need to get the center bolt out. It's a 13 mil. Now, just so I don't scratch the carbon, I'm going to remove it out of the way. But if you have the metal one, you can still go through this hole right there and get it off just fine. Let me just remove this. Now, when it comes to these little black clips, a lot of times what I like to do, especially if it's carbon, is just leave them in place. It's going to be super easy to do, and you don't have to risk breaking the carbon when you're pulling them out and putting them back in. Now that that's out of the way, this is the bolt we need to release. So with a 13 mil, you can remove it. All right, since I have an even to reintake, I need to remove this piece here, and then we're down to 4 T30s. So there's one here, here, and then the same on the other side. You have one over here and one over there. Then there's one little clip on here with the wire harness. Once you remove that, you can remove this entire piece. All right, at this point of the process, I'm going to put the car up in the air. We need to drop the exhaust. There's some underbody that we need to drop down as well. And I also want to make sure that I get all of the oil and coolant out of the vehicle. But before I put the car up in the air, I just want to loosen these caps. So this way it's going to flow nice and everything's going to extract from the vehicle. All right, so now that we're under the car, what I need to do is I need to start by removing the skid plate. As you can see, we do have a Turner skid plate on here. This is held in by different nuts and bolts than what yours may be held in with, especially if you have the factory plastic one. That's typically gonna be 8 millimeters or 10s. This one has a few different options. So at this time, drop that piece. Next, we need to remove the stiffening plate. So before we start unbolting it, we do need to get access to some of the bolts. So use an 8 mil or a 10, depending on what bolts BMW decided to use that day. And there's about 10 that hold this plastic cover in place. Then we're going to remove that. And then I'll do the exact same thing on the other side. And then I'll show you how to remove all the other bolts. All right, then do the exact same thing on the other side. So once you remove those, there's 5 more hidden 8 or 10 mil, depending on what your car has that day. So there's one over here, and then there's one over here, one over here, and then there's 2 on this side. So at this time, remove the remaining bolts. All right, so now it's time to remove the stiffening plate. This is held in by approximately 17 of these 16 mils. Now on the M4, it's all 16 mils. On my G80 M3, they have these larger nuts on the side. I forget what size it is. It's like a 28 or it's like a weird size, but it's a lot bigger. Why does BMW use different parts depending on what the car is? I have no idea. But at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen all of these by hand, and then I'm just gonna go through with my impact and pull them all out. Then once you have all the bolts out, you just carefully lower it down and navigate it out of the way. All right, so now that this plate is out of the way, we have a lot better visibility as to what's going to be happening. First thing we need to do at this point is I want to disconnect the O2 sensors from our downpipes, and we're just going to let them hang. To do this, I'd recommend just grabbing one of these generic 22 millimeter O2 sensor tools. You're gonna slide it on, loosen them, and then again, just let them hang. Then you can do the exact same thing to the other downpipe. All right, for this one, so you don't damage the O2 sensor, it's best if you pop the line off of this piece of metal. And I'll have it so you can spin it a little bit easier. There you go. All right, from this point, what we're going to do is we are going to drop the main section of the exhaust. To do this, you should only need a 13 millimeter unless you have different bolts like this car that we're working on today. There's typically going to be two 13 mils over here that holds your mid pipe to your down pipe. There's going to be 13 mils that attach your crossover pipe to the down pipe, the crossover pipe to the mid pipe, and then also all of the hangers and also the support brace are all 13 mils. So at this time, let's remove all of these and we'll show you what we're gonna do along the way. All right, so what we're going to do from here, we're going to remove these three 13 mils and then these three on the other side, and I'm going to lower this brace. Now, after looking at this, I think that actually might be enough to where we don't have to pull the full exhaust off, but if that's not enough, then we'll just continue to remove the entire thing. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to get some fluids out of the car, starting with the oil. So take a 17 mil, you're just gonna loosen this, let everything drain. All right, so now that the oil's out of the car, it's time to get the coolant out. We're going to start with the heat exchanger and then we'll move on to the radiator. So to get the coolant out of your heat exchanger, it's going to be right over here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pull up the tab and then I'm going to just hook my other tool here on there. So once you've released this clip, what you're going to do is you're going to reach up and you're going to pull this straight down and a lot of coolant is going to come gushing out. All right, so once you have the coolant out of here, for the most part, you take this clip, you lock it back in place, and then you slide this back on and clip it in. Make sure you hear that audible click. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but everything is super solid. All right, so the next hose I'm going to pull off, this one you don't necessarily have to do, but I'm going to do it while we're here. I like to always just use fresh coolant and oil after big jobs like this. On the other side, this has that same little metal ring. You put a pick tool in, pop it out, and then you're gonna pull this straight down. So as you can see over here, I release the ring and then I'm gonna pull down and get ready to catch all this. All right, so now I'm gonna reach up, snap that back in, and clip this in, okay? Locked. All right, so once you're here, we need to loosen two more bolts before we put the car back down on the ground. There's one over here, it's a 16 mil. It holds that A brace or V brace, whatever you wanna call it. And then there's another one over here. So at this time, let's pull those out. All right, once these two bolts are out, we can put the car down and continue up top. All right, now back from the top, we have our A brace or V brace, whatever you wanna call it. There is one little plastic tab. So if you just take a tool in like that, if you take a look over here, you can see where that was connected. But now that that's out, you should be able to just kind of drop this down a little bit. Then you can disconnect the electrical connection from your fan and just tuck this aside. Then over here, we're going to pop up this little tab over here that's going to hold this little skinny coolant line. This goes all the way over to your coolant reservoir. Be very careful with it because these do break all the time. So once we have that popped off, you can press that clip back down. Then you can unclip it from these little tabs and then remove it from the reservoir. Sometimes I like to use my pick tool as a little pry bar. Then to remove the fan, we need to remove this T30 on the driver's side, and there's a little clip on the passenger side. Just press that in, pull that up, and then this is going to pull straight up. Just make sure you're not getting hung up on any of the hoses. And now that that's out of the way, you can pull this brace straight up and out. All right, in preparation to remove our coolant reservoir, first thing we're going to do is remove all of these connections, starting with the EDC module. Then from there, remove the hose that's connected to the back of the reservoir. Then you can remove the lower hose to the reservoir. Be cautious because typically there is still going to be a little bit of coolant in here, so just be prepared. Then at this point, you can just pull this straight up. I'm gonna leave this other connection in place and I'm just gonna rock it out and set it up here out of the way. Next, you can disconnect your O2 sensor over here. Just press down on the tab right over here, and that's going to slide right out. And then what you need to do, there's this little plastic piece, you press that down and it'll slide forward. Then you can just take the wire and unmount it from the clips. Then you can do the exact same thing on the back. I like to pry this little tab down first before I disconnect it. Okay, then you can route that back, and that's gonna come down with the downpipe. Then over here, we can disconnect our wastegate actuators. You just pull this little gray tab back and then press it down, and that'll pop right off. And you do the same with the front turbo. Then back here you have a PCV hose. What you want to do is press on the rib sections on the left and the right. That will turn it to an oval essentially, and it will disengage the clips. If you take a look at the face of this, you can see that there's a little tab on the left and right side, and when I press on those ribs, it'll make it super easy to pop off. Then once you've done that, you can remove this other clip that's connected to your inlet. Same way we've been doing all these. You can just route these out of the way. Then you can just carefully pull this hose up and out of the way. Once you've done that, you can remove the PCV heater. It's held in with two T25s that look just like that. All right, so then you're gonna very carefully pop this up just like that. And this is connected to the block over here where the end of my finger is. This is an E8, so now we're gonna try to get this without dropping it. Okay, so I'm just gonna lift up on here carefully and slide that out just like that. All right, so then we can continue to remove part of the charge pipe. So first I'm gonna remove this 10 mil here. As you can see down there, this has a Mishimoto charge pipe, so it's gonna be a little bit different if you have a factory setup. Release these hose clamps, and I'm going to pull this off. Now, I am going to actually pull out this inlet. It's gonna make it easier for you guys to see what's going on, and it's also gonna make it a little bit easier for me. So let me just pull these two T30s out, and we'll all see what's going on a little bit better. All right, so before we can go any further, I want to get the car up in the air and I want to pull the rest of the downpipe off. All right, next thing we need to do is remove this 13mm V-band. There's one here and there's one up top. I'm not sure if you can see that one or not. It looks exactly the same. So release this bolt and then you can pull down your downpipes. All right, so once you get the bolt out, you just want to pry gently and then you should be able to get the rest of the V-band off and just spread it. And then from there, you should be able to wiggle everything out. Okay, and then do the same thing on the other. You can pop the V-band and drop it down. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're gonna do as much as we can below, and then we're gonna put the car down, and then we're going to proceed from the top. First thing we're going to work on, we're not gonna be able to get it fully off, but we're gonna get most of the bolts out. There's a heat shield over here on the back turbos. To remove this, there are two bolts that are accessible from the bottom, and these are E12s. So the one is back here. Just go nice and easy on these. All right, so there is what the bolt looks like. You need to do this by hand. These are aluminum, and if you have too much torque, you're gonna rip the head of this right off, and then you're going to be drilling and tapping, and it's going to be a nightmare. So make sure you take your time and go slow. These also have some Loctite on them to make sure that they're nice and in there. So again, go slow, do it by hand. The next one we can get access to is way up here. So let's do the same thing. All right, so what we're going to do now is we are going to release the T30s. There's two of those that hold the oil return in on both turbos. So what I like to do is just take a microfiber and just put it over here so we don't spill oil on anything. And then you're gonna reach up and remove those screws. For now, I'm gonna keep the rest of it attached to the block. You can either completely remove it or not. It's just one other T30 that secures it in place, but doesn't really have to move, so we're just gonna leave it there. I'm gonna reach up and remove the gasket. And I always like to see how the dome is. So you can see this actually domes up. So when we go to put this back in, you wanna make sure that it's doming up back into the turbo. Then you're gonna do the exact same thing on the front turbo. And same thing, I like to reach up and see how the gasket's positioned. And it's the exact same way the dome goes up. All right, so at this point, we've done pretty much everything that we can do from underneath. So let's drop the car down and continue up top. All right, continuing up top, let's remove the remainder of this heat shield. Okay, so then pull this out, and you can remove the remainder of your heat shield. Next, under the wastegate actuator, right over here, you're going to find another E12 right over there. So at this time, let's remove this one. Then there's another one right here. What I like to do on this one is if you have a 10mm open-ended wrench like this with the 10 mil ratchet typically fits on the E12. So let's remove this one. All right, then once you've done that, there's a T30 on the block over here. Break this free. And this is your oil feed line that we're pulling out right now. So then you're just gonna wanna pull that off the block. Just have a rag ready, you may drip a little bit of oil. What's gonna happen is when we pull the turbo out, that's going to stay attached to the turbo. And then on the other side, we're going to be able to do that from the top of the engine. Now it's gonna get tight once we get up top again, but these are gonna be the bolts, or the nuts I'll say, that you're going to need to remove. The good thing about the S58 is there's only 4. So you got one here, one over here, one a little bit further, and then one on the other end. So let's put the car down and we'll continue from the top. So now that that oil line is disconnected from the block, what's gonna happen is once we unbolt the 4 bolts that are holding the turbo on, we're going to remove the turbo and that line is going to come with it. We're going to do the exact same thing on the front turbo, but you need to access that from the top. Now, to limit the up and down of the car, what we're gonna start doing is actually removing some of the nuts that are holding the turbo on in the rear. So let's start with the rear 2. We'll give you a shot of where everything is. And for this, you're going to need a 10mm. All right, so now that those 2 are out, let's put the car down and continue up top. All right, so just like we did with the rear turbo, for the front one, we want to remove the line that is the oil feed line. So if you take a look over here, pull this harness off, there's a T30 right there. So you just reach in here and let's remove that. Okay, so then you can reach back in and pull that out of the block, just like that. All right, next you're gonna need your T30 and you're going to remove this bolt right here. This holds both the coolant lines and the return and the feed. And we're going to do this one here and then the same with the other side. So it gets a little bit difficult to see. We're gonna remove that. All right, so then take your T30. There's a secret one over here. Then finally, you need to get the T30 that's between these 2 coolant lines on the rear turbo. Okay, so now what you can do with all of those out, you can start to wiggle the bottom line out. What I typically like to do is just try to wiggle it in a little bit of a circular motion. It does get pretty stuck sometimes, but just keep at it and you'll get it. Sometimes if it gets really stuck, you can use a little flathead to help you pry it out. There it goes. And you can unclip it from up top. And then you can wiggle it out from the other turbo. Okay, perfect. Pop this little ring loose, and you can pop this off. And then you can wiggle this out of the way and set this off to the side. All right, so now what we're gonna do while we're over here, we're gonna pop this clip up on the water pump, pop that off, clip it in place. And then I'm gonna do the same with this one over here. Pop it up, navigate it off, and clip that in place. So then I'm going to go over here. I'm gonna pull out the coolant line on that turbo. Then I'm gonna pull out the coolant line on this turbo, and we're gonna get this coolant line completely out of the way. Okay, pop it out of that holder, make sure it's nice and loose. I'm just gonna temporarily unplug this. There's a clip on the back. Pop that like that. And you can navigate that over just like that. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the 2 final nuts that are holding the rear turbo in place. What I like to do is get the one on the outside. So I already got the left 2. Now I'm going to get the far right one, so that way all of the weight is pretty much locked in by that one that's second from the right. So let's remove this one, then we'll remove that other one, and then we'll pull the turbo out. All right, so now that we have that out, let's grab this last one, and then we'll pull the turbo out. All right, so then once all the nuts are out, you're gonna reach in, and there's a little metal bar. All right, so from here, sometimes these get a little bit stuck. Just be careful. You just wanna push up and push down a little bit. And then it'll swing out like that. Never grab it by the wastegate actuator, because if you do, you could do some damage to it. navigate it out. We have turbo number 1. All right, so now what we're going to do, get your E12 back out. We need to remove the rest of this heat shield. So there's a bolt here, over here, and then one below. We'll get this off, we'll pull out those other 4 bolts, and we'll remove the other turbo. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the 4 nuts that are securing the front turbo on. I'm gonna start with the left, go to the right, and then I'm just going to work on the 2 middle ones. Then we're gonna pop this one down and pull this turbo out. So this is off now. I just need to work this back and forth, pop this off. Again, don't ever grab the wastegate linkage. You will bend it, and it will be a bad day. All right, let's throw it on the table and compare the old and the new. Now, while we have the turbos off, I do just want to give you a side-by-side comparison of the old turbos and the new. So if you look over here, this is a stock S58 turbo, and it's pretty tiny. But if you take a look over here, what Mosselman does is they start with an OEM core, a brand new one. They bore it out and they put these new compressor and turbine wheels in. As you can see, just looking at it, it's absolutely nuts. What they also do is they take the time to redevelop the inlet. So right now they have fitment for stock Mishimoto and also the Eventuri, which this is. So even with the Eventuri intakes, they'll give you an inlet that looks like this, and Mosselman actually 3D prints them out of aluminum, which is super awesome. If you look at the bottom of the inlets, the plastic one from Eventuri can almost fit inside of it. This is maximized for maximum flow. All right, the next thing we need to do is we need to transfer over this little bracket and also our oil feed line over to our new turbo. Whenever you're doing this job, you need to do 2 things. First, make sure that you change every single gasket that you're removing. You don't want to have to go through all of this mess just because you cheaped out on a 15-cent part. To make it easy for you, I'm going to list all these part numbers for you down in the description below. The other thing you want to do is make sure that your turbo is properly lubricated. As you've seen in tons of videos, we squirt this Liqui-Moly turbocharger additive right in the top there before we put the oil line in. It's going to make sure, especially for that first start, everything is properly lubricated. All right, so now let's transfer over our oil line in this other bracket. We're going to change out the O-ring and then we're going to torque it down to 8 Newton meters. All right, now the turbo is just about ready to put in, but before we do that, we need to make sure that we remove this old gasket. Pull this out here. Okay. All right, so here's our old one. Let's throw on a new one. All right, so now that you have your O-rings changed and everything is torqued on your turbo, you have it properly lubricated, let me show you how to throw it on. So what you want to do is you're going to hook this bottom part on that little ledge underneath. So take your turbo again. Don't hold it by the wastegate actuator. And you want to swing it in just like that. Once you have it hooked on there, you can let go. It shouldn't fall. Just be extra careful. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take this little bar. It goes like this. You can see the indents from when we last did it, but the little bumps go up. And this is going to go over all of those studs that are sticking out. Then from there, you're gonna take the nuts and we're gonna torque them down to 10 Newton meters at first. Then we're gonna go back and we're gonna torque them to 16 Newton meters. The torque sequence is number 3, number 2, number 4, number 1. So once you do all of those to 10, you're going to do the same thing and you're going to go to 16. So then you're going to do number 3, number 2, number 4, number 1. So at this time, let's torque it down. All right, so then after changing out your O-ring here too, you're going to pop your oil line back into the block, and then you're going to pop back in the T30 that you removed. And all these T30s get torqued down to 8 Newton meters. Then you can reinstall the little PCV part that goes into your inlet. Just be careful you don't break it. And this bolt is going to get torqued down to 8 Newton meters as well. And while you're here, you can plug that in if you like. And also plug this in. And then I just need to reinstall the new bolts that are provided with the Mosselman turbos. All right, so now that you've done that, you can reinstall your heat shield. You always want to use new aluminum bolts because they can snap. Let's torque them down this time to 10 Newton meters. Then we're going to do the exact same thing on the back. So again, make sure that your gasket comes off first. We're going to replace that, and we're going to swap over the oil line, and we're going to torque it down the exact same way. All right, same exact thing now on the rear turbo. Let's throw it on. All right, so once you have everything in place, what you want to do is follow the exact same torquing sequence that we did for the first turbo. All right, the second turbo is torqued down. Now we can reinstall our heat shield here and torque those bolts to 10 Newton meters. One important note when you're doing this rear heat shield, always make sure you get all of the bolts in before you actually tighten anything. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to get into place. All right, so while we're under the car, finishing up that heat shield, what we're going to do is we are going to pop our oil line back in. Make sure you use a new gasket every time for this kind of stuff. And then we're going to put a T30 in, and we're going to tighten that down again to 8 Newton meters. All these T30s are the exact same. It's all 8 Newton meters. So now you can remove this little plug if you haven't done so already. And make sure you put one of these little gaskets. Remember, the little dome goes up. All right, so do the same thing on the front turbo. All right, from here, we're going to reinstall that lower portion of our charge pipe. And then after this, we'll put the downpipes back on. At this point, we're ready to install some new gaskets. Then we can bolt up our downpipes, and then we can hook everything back up to the turbo and put these O2 sensors back where they belong. And then we'll continue again back up top. So a little pro tip for you, if you are going to be reusing your old clamps, a lot of times what happens is as you're trying to get everything positioned, the bolt falls out and falls on the ground. What I found works really well is if you get a little tiny O-ring and slap it on there, it keeps your bolt from falling out and makes it a lot easier to do with just one person. All right, downpipes are on. Let's drop the car and continue up top. All right, now that we're back up here, I'm gonna tighten this bolt over here. Then we can connect our O2 sensors. All right, so I connected the O2 sensor in the back. I've got this one routed up and ready. So I'm gonna run over, swap out all of the O-rings on the coolant lines, and then we're going to install those one by one. You just do it in the reverse order that it was removed. So we're gonna start with the top one, and then we're going to move on to the bottom one. We'll take our vacuum line, plug this back in, and then you can just basically start to work backwards and reconnect everything we disconnected. So now I want to get the charge pipe on so then we can put the fan back in, and it's coming along nicely. All right, so now I'm going to reinstall my charge pipe. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to reinstall our coolant tank here. Just be careful, sometimes it does have a little bit of coolant in it still, and you don't want to accidentally dump any of that into your inlet. So then you can take your coolant line over here, snap that on. You have a coolant line in the back, and then we have one more connection that's gonna go over here. All right, so at this point we are ready to drop our fan back in. I recommend taking a clean microfiber and just throwing it over your inlet, just in case your fan has any dirt on it at all. Nothing accidentally goes in there. So we're just gonna get that and we're gonna slide it straight down. All right, so you're gonna take your fan, just drop this straight down. Be very careful around your coolant lines over here. You just wanna bend these over. Make sure that you're not gonna accidentally pinch anything. Then once you have it straight down, so then you can clip it into place. You'll know that it's in place when this hole lines up, and also everything here clips in really nice. Then from here, you can take your connection, clip that back in. Then you can take the T30s that you removed, and you can reinstall them. All right, next what we're going to do is reinstall our little coolant line. This goes under our wire for the fan. You can snap this in. Make sure you hear an audible click on all this stuff. And that one over here. And clip this into place. All right, so now you can take your crossbar and we're going to reinstall that. But while we're here and while we have all of this apart, we're not going to use the stock bolts. We have an upgrade. We have a full black Downstar kit that we're going to be installing to add a little bling under the hood of Edwin's car. All right, so then for these little ones, these are gonna get torqued down to 11.8 Newton meters. And even though these are aftermarket bolts, it's recommended to follow the OEM torque spec. All right, so the torque spec from BMW on these is 56 Newton meters and then 90 degrees of rotation. Pull that up. All right, before we continue any further up top, I do need to go underneath just to pop this little A-brace up, and then we'll get everything tightened down. All right, so then we're going to take this other bolt here, and per BMW, this is the same torque. So it's 56 and then 90 degrees of rotation. All right, so then you can take your radiator cover. Make sure you go under the latch wire. Start to line everything up, and then make sure your push pins over here are down into that rubber section over there. So now I'm going to reinstall these push pins. All right, so since we have an Venturi intake, we can put our air ducts back in. Make sure that everything is properly aligned. Then you can take all these bolts across the top, and these are gonna get torqued down to 28 Newton meters. Now, because this is carbon, it is possible that the carbon could start to crack. If you start to hear creaking and cracking, you can stop there. It's not crazy essential that these are torqued perfectly. So then you can put these bolts in. Again, they get torqued down to 28, but if you can't quite make it, it's not the end of the world. Next, we're going to swap out this bolt over here for the strut tower. This is an E14. Look at that difference. And the OEM spec on this is 28 and then 180. Then we'll do the same on the other side. And these get torqued down to 11.8. Then with the T30, you can remove these two bolts. And these go down to 11.8. And you can remove this one. Pop this on here, and all these little ones are the same. They're all 11.8 Newton meters. And we can set these ones up. All right, so from here, these are all pretty easy, so we're just gonna fly through this. All right, now we can reinstall our e-venturi intake. If you unplugged this earlier, don't forget to plug it back in or your car will not run correctly. All right, this gets torqued down to 56 Newton meters and 90 degrees. Then let's tighten these to 28 Newton meters. All right, so while we're this far, I want to make sure we do everything the best we can, so I'm just going to swap out his oil filter with a fresh one. Then you can reinstall a brand new crush washer and torque this down to 24.9 Newton meters. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to fill the car with 7 liters of Liqui Moly SpecialTech 5W30. As you can see, this does have the BMW approval, so we'll have no issues there. Then we're going to fill and bleed the coolant using genuine BMW coolant. All right, so now what we're going to do is reinstall the negative terminal of the battery. And then before we reinstall all of the underbody protection, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the car starts up, runs, and make sure there's no leaks. Without that on, you're going to have a clear shot to look at the coolant lines and the oil lines to make sure nothing at all is dripping. If you put that on, you have an issue, then you're going to have to pull it back off, and it's a huge pain in the butt. So let me finish tightening this up, and then we'll give it its first start. All right, when you first start up your car, be prepared, your turbos will smoke. In the production of these turbos, they typically use these machining oils, and those are going to be burning off while your car is getting up to temperature. And that is totally normal. Now, if you start to see excessive smoke, shut the car down and make sure you're looking for any kind of oil leak or whatnot. We always keep a fire extinguisher on hand when we're doing this, just to be extra careful. So with that, let's give it its first start. All right, so this is the smoke that I was talking about. If you see light smoke like this, don't start freaking out or anything. This is totally normal. It does need to get up to temperature though to fully burn off. If you see it doing more than this, you might want to shut the car off, make sure that you're checking everything. All right, so everything is looking great. There's absolutely no leaks or anything like that. And as you can see, the smoke has definitely calmed down, pretty much looks gone at this point. So what I'm going to do while the car is in the air is I'm going to reinstall all of the underbody protection. For those large bolts that hold on the big stiffening plate, you torque them down to 56 Newton meters, and then you give it an extra 90, and it's always a good idea to replace these if you're doing this job. So with that, let me throw the rest of the car back together, and then we'll be done. All right, once everything underneath is completely buttoned up, the car should be up to operating temperature. And then from there, just go through the car and check out the oil level, because again, these are electronic. You have to read it through the iDrive system. Once the oil level is great, you are good to go. You shouldn't have any kind of errors. In some situations, you might need ISTA to set your wastegates, but on this car, in my car, and many others, it actually didn't require any further adjustment. But that does vary from car to car, so you might need to adjust them. But if you do have to do that, as long as you have access to ISTA, it's actually a very simple process. So that wraps up how to do turbos on an S58 engine. As you saw, it's not very difficult. It is a little bit time consuming. For your first time, it'll probably take you 10 to 12 hours or so. And then if you do it after that, you can get faster and faster with it once you learn where everything is. But anyway, once again, my name is Brian. Thanks for watching today's video. If you liked our video, give us a thumbs up, make sure to subscribe. And if you need turbos or other parts for your BMW or Porsche, see the links down in the description to kies.com, Kies.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.